Okay, good evening, everybody, or at least it is evening here in Berlin. My name is Marielle Dado. And yeah, thank you so much, Christian, for inviting me to give the first data modeling meetup of the year. It's such an honor to be presenting to this crowd this evening. So, who are you listening to this evening? My name is Marielle. I am currently a staff data engineer at a company called Paddle. Going to talk a little bit about Paddle and my work there in this presentation. But before I was a data engineer or analytics engineer, I was a researcher in a field called applied cognitive sciences. So that's an interdisciplinary field that combines psychology, computer science, and a bunch of other fields to study how people learn. And my research focus at the time was on computer-supported collaborative learning. So I was looking at groups of students learning in groups or in pairs through some kind of computer interface, and I was just finding like different tools and different methods that would help them learn more effectively. So currently, I do mostly what you would call like analytics engineering. So it's basically providing clean data sets for different business teams to help them with business intelligence and other data analysis work. I found my way through this into this profession via DBT, or the modern data stack, if you will. Which is only to say that like if I get some terms wrong from like kind of the, you know, let's say traditional kind of the traditional let's say kind of concepts related to like database theory. See, I don't even know, like please don't shoot me because I'm still relatively new to this world. However, I have been able to find a lot of synergies between my background in psychology and cognitive sciences and the world of data. And this talk is kind of like basically a reflection of that like philosophy that I have when it comes to data modeling, as informed by my experience as a researcher. So hopefully I can impart some knowledge to you that might not necessarily be practical. It may be a little bit philosophical, but having a philosophy or having a solid like approach or to data modeling is what helps me stay grounded in this kind of ever-changing tech world where there are new tools every day and new processes to do things. So hopefully it'll be at least insightful for some of you. This talk is also an extended version of a talk that I gave last year at Coalesce. Coalesce is a big analytics engineering conference organized by DBT Labs, which is the makers of DBT. If you're not familiar with DBT, it's basically a transformation tool that allows you to do data transformations on top of a cloud data warehouse using SQL queries. So it's on YouTube. It's available on YouTube. The name of the talk is "I Don't Build Models, I Construct Knowledge." This is a more kind of a bit more of an academic talk and than what I presented at Coalesce, but it won't be too academic, I think. And also, if you prefer to read, I discovered this book, just holding it up on the camera right now. It's called Data Model Storytelling. Some of you might have that in your bookshelves right now. And it doesn't explicitly mention knowledge construction, but I love how Larry Burns, the author, basically talks about data modeling from a knowledge construction perspective. It's I think the only data modeling book that I've seen that actually takes some of like knowledge construction principles and applies it to data modeling. So I am going to share some insights from that book that I found very interesting. And if you're interested to explore this knowledge construction perspective, I highly suggest you pick up this book as well. Lastly, before I dive into the kind of meaty bits, when you hear me say data model, again, I come from this like new age way of doing data modeling, I guess. So I usually would refer to both like ER diagrams and SQL queries that build data sets as data models. So I don't necessarily think it's important to I don't think it's important to kind of make a distinction between like data artifacts and data models, at least for the purpose of this talk. But just keep this in mind that I don't exclusively refer to ER diagrams as data models. Okay. All right, I would like to start the content part of my presentation with a question to the audience. So what makes a good data model in your opinion? You don't have to type in the chat if you don't feel like it, but I do want you to give it a think, and I'll probably give you about 5 seconds just to mull that over. And if you want to type it in the chat, that's great too. But yeah, what makes a good and effective data model? When I tried to find opinions about this on the internet, I found like things like a data model has to be complete. It means that the data model supports all the necessary data of the business, doesn't have missing columns or missing records. It is adaptable to changes, so it can cope well with any possible changes to the business requirements. Yeah, and it's a data model basically includes all of the business rules that are relevant. So it reflects and enforces the rules that apply to the business's data. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, by introducing knowledge construction as a concept, I can offer an alternative way of defining what a good data model is. So because, yeah, to understand data construction, it kind of requires a perspective shift beyond just like the technical performance. Is it is it robust to changes, or does it accurately describe all the business rules we care about? So modeling the business from a knowledge construction perspective requires a shift from just describing the business to enabling the business. And maybe some of you already think that this makes sense, and that you approach your work in data modeling in this way. But let's elaborate on this idea for the next hour. So what is knowledge construction? So when we talk about classroom learning or learning in general, we usually think about gaining knowledge, right? So when you think about a classroom, you usually envision like a group of students and a teacher in front of the group of students, basically talking about today's lesson. You can think about learning as well as you reading a book or you watching an educational video. Knowledge construction is about producing knowledge. So what is the difference here? Difference is that with knowledge construction, you are extending the knowledge that you've gained by engaging actively in the content that you've just learned. So the main difference between the pictures that you see on your screen is that in the gaining knowledge part, the students are passively receiving information. But when it comes to producing knowledge, like the student that you see in the photo is taking down notes. Even the simple action of taking down notes is him already engaging with his knowledge actively and producing new knowledge just for himself. So when I first encountered knowledge construction in my research, I thought that, does this mean like making big scientific discoveries? And kind of introducing that into the world? No, it's about producing new knowledge for yourself, and finding a different way of formulating what you already know and storing that in memory. So simple activities such as taking notes, summarizing, or even highlighting an interesting fact that you read in a book are ways of engaging with learning material in an active way, and that is considered knowledge construction. So my specific interest is in collaborative learning, and one thing that really fascinated me was the notion of boundary objects. So what is a boundary object? So a boundary object is any artifact in a learning context, at least for my research, that sits in the middle of different or diverse individuals or groups to help establish a shared context for communication. So it's about like engaging. Remember that knowledge construct is about engaging actively in learning content. So a boundary object is an artifact that a group of learners can engage actively in and use that to form a shared understanding of a concept that they're learning. So it's basically another way of formulating it is it's shared objects to talk about, shared objects to think with, and shared objects to coordinate perspectives and actions in the context of collaborative work. If you're interested to learn, like do a deep dive into boundary objects, I highly suggest reading the original paper that came up with the concept of boundary objects. So it was actually, it's actually from a paper that talks about museums and museum artifacts and how that museum artifacts are boundary objects that bring different people from different walks of life together to, in the spirit of knowledge construction. So just to give an example of how this boundary object thing works in a learning context, I just took an example from a research paper that talks about boundary objects. So what you see in front of you is an infographic that a high school student created as part of a research project about climate change. So in this research project, high school students were asked to design infographics about climate change. The brief that they got from the teacher was to create a visual representation of a scientific argument. So the students went and did initial research about climate change, and then they put together a little infographic to present their arguments. And then after that, like students were paired with a climate scientist or an ecologist, and they were this pair of them were engaged in a discussion about like scientific argumentation regarding climate change. So the climate scientists would basically critique the work of the students by asking them for citations of the different data points that they're presenting in their infographic. Like scientists were also talking students through different scenarios of climate change and approaches that they may not have considered in their initial draft of their infographic. And then afterwards, students then incorporated feedback from the scientists in their final draft of the infographic. And the study basically talks about how that there was a marked improvement from the initial draft of their infographic when the students were just working by themselves and after they'd engaged in a collaborative discussion with the climate scientists. So let's talk about what makes a good boundary object, right? So a good boundary object creates a shared syntax or language between groups. So if you think about it, if you bring a random high school student and a random scientist into the same room just a bare room, it might be hard to get them to start a conversation, right? Or if you put this pair in an empty room and tell them to talk about climate change, it'll take them a couple of minutes or maybe a couple of hours to nail down what they actually mean about climate change. A good thing about having an infographic where the discussion will start from the student's knowledge is that the scientists can basically just pick up where the student had already begun, and then they can use that infographic to define what are we talking about when we're talking about climate change in the context of this discussion only. So a good boundary object also allows participants to share what they know and express their concerns. And of course, it's pretty obvious in this example that climate scientists are experts in the field of climate science. So when a student presents a data point about climate change, scientists then are able to engage in that in an active way, and they can express their concerns about whether the data is valid, whether the argumentation is valid, and the high school students themselves in turn can point out other points that they themselves find important. For example, whether it's even feasible to incorporate the climate scientists' feedback into the infographic. And then finally, a good boundary object can be transformed or altered so that individuals can apply what they know into the boundary object. So after the students received the feedback from the climate scientists, they were able to modify their work and improve it based on the feedback of essentially an expert in that field. And given that, good boundary objects can be transformed or altered. If you think about it, a book isn't a very good boundary object because it's not something that you can alter after you've learned something new. So that's basically the three things that I wanted to point out about boundary objects is that they provide a shared, basically common ground that different groups can use in order to create new knowledge. So I think you might know where I'm going with this. I see data models as really great boundary object, not in a learning context necessarily, but in the context of businesses and collaborative work between the data modelers or data engineers and business-facing teams. So again, referring to the data modeling storytelling book by Larry Burns, I really like what he said in the first chapter, Data Model Reimagined, about what the purpose of a data model is. And I'm going to just basically read out the description to you, and maybe you can think about whether any of this already sounds familiar. So, data models are visual representations of the way people think and talk about real-world objects and the relationships between them. So data models guide and encourage discussions about the objects and relationships from the real world and help surface differences of opinions. They iteratively refine our evolving understanding of data, giving all stakeholders a common basis for discussion and keeping them on the same page. They help a group of people think through the data aspects of a certain business problem. And the data model itself is not as important as the conversations the data model promotes. So essentially, all of this sounds like what makes a good boundary object, right? This is the description of a good boundary object that I just shared with you. And at least personally, I see a lot of synergies between how Larry Burns described the data model and how boundary objects are described in the knowledge construction literature. So maybe just for a few moments, I'd like for you to think about a couple of things. So who are the diverse individuals? If you're a data modeler, I assume you're here because you're in the business of data modeling or in the business of data at all. So who are the diverse individuals that are being brought together in conversation around the data models you create? So that's one question to think about. And what kinds of conversations do they enable within your context? Maybe just think about, I don't know, the last meeting that you had. Yeah, and maybe what kind of conversations were inspired by the data models that you created. And can you think about any instances that you where you've modified your data model in light of these conversations, like modified in a way that actually improves the data model? So I'll maybe leave you with those questions for 5 seconds. I'm also just catching up with the chat. Really good insights here. What makes a good data modeler? maybe something for the Q&A. Cool. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own work at my current company, Paddle, and maybe kind of like, just explain a little bit about how I think about my own output in terms of boundary objects and knowledge construction. So Paddle is a fintech company based in the UK, and we create payments infrastructure for software companies, so SaaS companies. So how it works, it's super simple. We have merchants. So these are SaaS companies that produce software and sell software on a subscription basis. And those merchants have customers. So you and I who like to purchase, I don't know, subscriptions to, I don't know, Netflix or something like that. And so we're basically the people in the middle, helping SaaS companies or merchants get paid by their customers. So we're kind of like Stripe, we're kind of like PayPal, but we're all kind of just bringing all of those gateway providers together so that our merchants don't have to set that up themselves. And so one thing that Paddle is really known for is its ability to make cross-border payments easy. So this is a screenshot from a marketing campaign that was just released this week. So a cross-border payment basically just means we help merchants get paid by different customers around the world without the merchants having to worry about things like taxes, localization, different currencies, and things like that. So basically we help them figure out localized currencies, tax compliance, language support, etc. So because we deal with cross-border payments, and we are a fintech company and we deal with online payments, we care about payments data, obviously. And one common question that, like, at least I get from business stakeholders is, which country is associated with this payment? And at least before I joined Paddle, I like the term country, or the concept of a country, was pretty straightforward to me. It's a geographic location. But when you're dealing with cross-border payments, this can quickly get complicated. So here are a few things that country of a payment might mean in our context. So is it the country associated with the customer's card? Or is it the IP address at the time of the purchase? So where was the customer at the time when they purchased the software? Is it the country of the acquiring bank, which is the bank of the merchant or the company, the SaaS company, which could also get quickly complicated because you could have a Canadian company with an acquiring bank that's US based. So it's really like not a straightforward concept at all, like the concept of a country when you're dealing with cross-border payments. And that's why earlier in the presentation I said that that data modeling as a knowledge construction should be about enabling the business and describing than just describing the business, because at least in my context, describing payments by country is practically a kind of futile exercise, let's say, because it's not really going to be, there's never going to be an adequate description of a payments country when it is devoid of context. So again, referencing now my now favorite data modeling book by Larry Burns. If it isn't clear, you should really get this book. I really like the chapter entitled "In Search of Meaning," because I think this is really gets at the heart of what knowledge construction is in the context of data modeling. Someone in the chat said, "What makes a good data modeler?" And here is your answer. The job of a data modeler is not to model the reality of the business, but to enable the business to understand the consequences of the reality it has chosen to accept. So a data model encompasses a subset of reality that we meaning the business, have chosen to talk about. So basically what this means for me is that the reality that the business has chosen is that it has chosen to deal with cross-border payments, which means that the concept of a country will never be the same, and that every discussion about country has to be in context of what is being asked for in that moment. So as can you imagine there are different teams that are that make up our make up our business. I want to talk about three in particular. So we have customer success, we have a team, the risk team, and our product team, right? So our customer success team, who's in charge of managing the demands or questions from our merchants, may ask the question, how many EU customers do we have? Does merchant X have? So maybe what they need at the time is to look at the customer, the country associated with the customer's card, and no other country here matters. This is the reality and the focus that the focus of reality that we're talking about in this moment, or hopefully the data model I produce for them. We'll present this to them. In terms of our risk team, they are concerned about fraudulent transactions. So how do we find potentially fraudulent transactions? And this can be flagged fairly easily if the customer card country and the IP address don't match. Of course, there are exceptions, and hopefully, actually there should actually be the fraud itself should be the exception, and the data model should be able to capture that. And for the product team that is in charge of actually producing our product of payments infrastructure, they are concerned about making sure that every merchant, that every legitimate payment should go through to the merchant so that the merchant can earn money, right? And the way to do that is to make sure that there is an acquiring bank in every country, or most countries, where a customer would be paying. So you would look at customer card and acquiring bank, or the country of the acquiring bank. So essentially, we are selecting that my data model should be selecting a specific slice of reality, depending on who is asking for that data. And I'm sure that you do the same as well. So this wasn't meant to be too long of a talk, because I'm more curious to discuss with you the kind of the different concepts that I presented today. A lot of this is, as I said, to me, quite philosophical and very personal as well, because I did research on this, and I'm really curious to know if this has resonated with any of you. So I'm going to wrap this up pretty early so that we can have more time for discussion. But I guess the key message that I would like to leave you with is that we should measure the value of a data model based on the knowledge that it triggers, and the conversations that they anchor, where people can find common ground, the assumptions about the data or the business or the reality of the business that it surfaces, and the consensus building that it facilitates. So yes, hopefully at least this was somewhat enlightening to you, and I'm excited to hear about what you think about it.